When the papers hit the table, the whole world held its breath. It was December 2006. And the woman sitting across that courtroom, the woman who had stood beside Michael Jordan through 6 championship rings, through the grief of losing his father, through 17 years of building a life inside the eye of the most powerful storm in sports history, she was done waiting. Juanita Jordan wanted half of everything, half of $400 million. And the number that landed on the front page of every newspaper in America the next morning was so large that people read it twice just to make sure their eyes were working right. $200 million. Now here is the thing everybody thought they knew about Michael Jordan. He did not lose. Not on the court, not in business, not in card games on team flights, not anywhere. This was the man who got cut from his high school basketball team and turned that single moment of rejection into the fuel that powered the greatest career in the history of professional sports. This was a man who competed at everything, like his life depended on winning it. So when the most expensive divorce in sports history landed in his lap, the whole world leaned forward. They were ready for a war. They were ready for lawyers screaming, for secrets spilling out into the open, for Michael Jordan to do what Michael Jordan always did, fight with everything he had and refuse to give a single inch until the final buzzer. But what happened next was something nobody in that courtroom saw coming, something that the greatest athletes, the smartest lawyers, when the most powerful people in that building were completely unprepared for. Michael Jordan made a choice that day, a quiet choice, a private choice, a choice that never made the highlight reel but said more about who he really was than any championship trophy ever could. And that choice, the thing he did instead of fighting, is the reason this story has never left people alone. It is the reason that people who think they already know everything about Michael Jordan stop cold when they hear it. It is the reason that even Juanita herself, years later, said something about him that she had never said before. Something she wrote down by hand, on real paper, with a pen her own mother had given her. A letter so honest and so powerful that when the right person finally read it, the story changed completely. Do you think you know how this ends? You do not. Stay with this video all the way through, because the moment that changes everything does not come at the beginning. It does not come in the middle. It comes at the end, quietly, the way the most important things in life always do. And when it hits you, it is going to hit you hard. This is the real story of Michael Jordan, Juanita Vinoy, and the divorce that showed the world something 6 championship rings never could. Let us start from the very beginning. Before there was money, before there was fame, before there was the divorce that shook the world and put a number so big on the front page of every newspaper that people read it twice just to make sure they were seeing it right. Before all of that, there was a boy named Michael. He grew up in Wilmington, in North Carolina. His street was like most streets in that part of town. Quiet in the mornings, loud in the afternoons when the kids came home from school. The houses were not big, the yards were not fancy, but the people were solid. They worked hard. They looked out for each other. They believed that if you put your head down and gave your best, life would eventually give something back. Michael's father, James, worked at a power plant. He was a big man with a calm voice and a laugh that made other people want to laugh too. His mother, Dolores, ran the house like a captain runs a ship, with total control and total love. They had 5 children. Every single one of them was expected to do 3 things: work hard, stay out of trouble, and make something of themselves. Michael was the 4th child. He was not the tallest. Oh, he was not the fastest. He was not, if we are being honest, the best player in his own neighborhood when he first picked up a basketball. But he was the hungriest. There is a story the Jordan family used to tell. When Michael was around 10 years old, his older brother Larry would beat him in one-on-one basketball almost every single time. Larry was bigger. Larry was quicker. Larry was meaner on the court in the way that older brothers always are. He would score on Michael, talk a little trash, and watch his younger brother's face go tight with frustration. Michael would lose. He would walk inside, sit down, take about 10 minutes, and then he would come back out. Every time. He always came back out. His mother, Dolores, used to watch this from the kitchen window. She would stand there with a dish towel in her hands and watch her fourth child lose again and again in the driveway. She did not feel sorry for him. She did not go outside and tell Larry to go easy. She felt something else when she watched Michael walk back out that door. She felt proud because she understood what she was seeing. She was not watching a boy lose. She was watching a boy learn that pain had a purpose. When Michael was 15 years old, something happened that would follow him for the rest of his life. He tried out for the varsity basketball team at Laney High School in Wilmington. The tryouts lasted a few days. Boys ran drills. They took shots. They defended. They showed the coaches everything they had. When it was over, the coach, a man named Clifton Herring, posted a list on a wall in the hallway. In the list had the names of every player who had made the team. Michael walked up to that wall with the other boys crowded around it. He looked for his name. He read the list once. Then he read it again. His name was not there. He was 5 feet 10 inches tall, and Coach Herring thought he was too short. The coach picked a boy named Leroy Smith instead, because Leroy was taller and the team needed height. Michael Jordan stood in that hallway and felt the floor go out from under him. He went home, he went to his room, and he cried, not in front of anyone. Michael was not the kind of boy who showed that kind of hurt to the world, but he cried alone, in his room with the door shut, because he had wanted that spot on that team more than he had ever wanted anything, and it was gone, given to someone else. Like he wasn't good enough, like he didn't matter. His mother heard him. She knocked on the door. She came inside. She sat on the edge of his bed, and she did not tell him it was okay. She did not tell him the coach had made a mistake. She did not promise him everything would work out. She looked at her son and she asked him a question. "What are you going to do about it?" That question lit a fire in Michael Jordan that never, not once, not for a single day for the rest of his life, went out. He practiced every morning before school. He ran. He worked on his handle. He shot until his arms ached, and then he shot some more. He grew 3 full inches over the summer. The following year, he made the varsity team. The year after that, he was the best player on it. Then he went to the University of North Carolina and hit the national championship winning shot as a freshman. Then the Chicago Bulls drafted him. Then the whole world changed. But here is what nobody said out loud when they talked about his success. Here is the part that lived underneath every trophy and every endorsement deal and every impossible moment. The boy who got cut from his high school team never stopped feeling like he had something to prove. Not to the coach, not to Leroy Smith, to himself. That feeling made him the greatest basketball player who ever lived. It also, slowly and quietly, and without anyone seeing it coming, made it very hard for him to simply be a husband. Some fires warm the people around them, and some fires, if you are not careful, burn everything they touch. Juanita Vinoy did not dream about marrying a basketball star. That sounds like something people say just to seem humble, but with Juanita, it was simply the truth. She had never sat in her bedroom as a little girl and imagined a famous man sweeping her off her feet. She had bigger things to think about. More real things. She grew up on the south side of Chicago. Her neighborhood was tough in the way that certain neighborhoods are tough. Not loud about it, just quietly demanding. The streets required something from you every single day. You had to be sharp. You had to be careful. You had to know who you were before someone else decided for you. Juanita figured out who she was early. Her family did not have much money, so she worked. She studied. She took every opportunity she could find and held on to it with both hands. By the time she was in her early 20s, she was working as an executive secretary and doing some modeling on the side. She had her own apartment, her own income, her own life. Small maybe, but entirely hers. She answered to nobody. That is the most important thing to understand about Juanita Vinoy before the rest of this story makes any sense. She was not looking for Michael Jordan. She was not waiting to be rescued. She was a full person before he ever walked into the room. It was the summer of 1985 when they met. Michael was 22 years old. He had already finished his first season with the Chicago Bulls. He was becoming famous in that fast, unstoppable way that happens when talent and timing line up perfectly. The commercials were starting. Hot people were beginning to say his name the way they said the names of people who were going to matter for a long time. He walked into a restaurant in Chicago one evening with some friends. Juanita was already there, sitting at a table across the room. She was not watching the door. She was not looking to see who had just walked in. She was laughing at something a friend had said. A real laugh. The kind that comes from somewhere deep and honest and has no performance in it whatsoever. Michael stopped mid-sentence. He looked at her. He asked someone nearby if they knew who she was. He found out her name. He found out she was from Chicago, that she was smart, that she worked hard, that she was not the type of woman who tried to get noticed. He walked over. He introduced himself. Was she already knew who he was? Of course she did. Everybody in Chicago knew who he was by then. But she was cool about it. She did not get nervous. She did not giggle or stare. She shook his hand and looked him straight in the eye, and they talked for a while, and it was easy. That was the thing that got him. The easiness. When you are one of the most famous people in any room you walk into, you are never totally sure who is talking to you and who is talking to your fame. People behave differently around celebrity. They get louder or quieter. They try harder. They want something from you even when they pretend they don't. Juanita didn't want anything. She just talked to him like he was a person. He called her the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that. They started dating seriously in 1986. By this point, the fame was growing fast. The shoe deal with Nike was coming. The commercials were everywhere. Michael Jordan was becoming something larger than a basketball player. He was becoming a symbol, an idea, a name that meant something to people who had never even watched a game. Juanita stood beside all of it. She was not the type of woman who needed to be in front of cameras. She did not chase the spotlight. She let Michael have it because honestly, she did not want it. And because she loved him enough to understand that the spotlight was part of who he was. That worked in the beginning. But here is a quiet truth about standing in someone else's light for a long time. After a while, you start to forget what your own light looks like. She saw things in Michael that the cameras missed. She saw the loneliness that lived right behind the confidence. She heard it in his voice during late-night phone calls in the early months of their relationship. The way he talked about growing up, about always having to prove himself, about being in a room full of thousands of people and still sometimes feeling like he was completely alone. She understood that feeling. She had felt it herself, in different ways, growing up on the South Side with big dreams and no roadmap. That understanding became the foundation of something real between them. He proposed in 1987. She said yes. They had their son Jeffrey in 1988. They took a pause. They found each other again. They finally married in September of 1989, a small private ceremony in Las Vegas with a few close friends and no big production. Just a promise, made quietly. I'm between two people who meant it completely. Two more children came. Marcus in 1990, Jasmine in 1992, a family, a real one, and Juanita ran it. Not just the house, everything. The schedules, the staff, the decisions, the details that never made any headline, but kept the whole structure standing. While Michael was out becoming a legend, Juanita was home making sure the legend had something solid to come back to. She did all of it with grace. She did not complain. But grace held too long without rest becomes its own kind of exhaustion. And exhaustion, ignored long enough, becomes something harder to name, something that starts small, like the first thin crack in a wall that everyone agrees looks perfectly fine. There are marriages that end in explosions. One big fight, one terrible night, and one moment so loud and so ugly that it breaks everything at once and leaves no question about what happened or why. And then there are marriages that end the way a river erodes a riverbank, slowly, quietly, a little bit at a time. Day after day, the water moves over the same ground, and the ground gives way so gradually that nobody notices. Not until the morning when someone looks down and realizes the bank is simply gone. Michael and Juanita Jordan were the second kind, and it started with a murder. On July 23, 1993, James Jordan pulled his car to the side of a highway in North Carolina to rest during a long drive. He was tired. He needed to sleep for a while before getting back on the road. Two teenagers found him there. They shot him, they took his car, they left him on the side of the road like he was nothing. Sir James Jordan, the big man with the calm voice and the laugh that made everyone else want to laugh, was gone. Michael found out the way nobody should ever find out about the death of someone they love. A phone call, a few words, and then a silence so large it swallowed everything around it. James Jordan had been more than Michael's father. He had been his anchor, the one person who could still make Michael feel like a regular person, like a son, like something other than a brand or a symbol or the most famous athlete alive. James had a way of sitting with Michael, quietly, without needing anything, without talking about basketball or money or what the world expected, that nobody else in Michael's life could replicate. When James died, something in Michael broke that no championship ring could fix. 3 months after his father's murder, Michael Jordan stood in front of a room full of reporters and retired from basketball. He said he had nothing left to prove. He said he had lost his desire to play. He did not talk about grief. Michael Jordan did not do that. He had been trained since childhood to take pain and convert it into action, to use it, to turn the fire into fuel and run on it until the race was won. But some pain is too big to run on. Some pain just lives in you, heavy and still, like a stone at the bottom of a river. He tried baseball. His father had loved baseball more than basketball. He had always told Michael that baseball was the real game. So Michael signed with a minor league team, the Birmingham Barons, and spent a season trying to hit curveballs in front of small crowds in small stadiums. It was, in its own strange way, one of the most honest things Michael Jordan ever did. He was not good at baseball. He was not going to be great at it. He knew that, but he was out there every day struggling and grinding and swinging at pitches he couldn't quite reach. And somewhere in all of that struggle was a son trying to stay connected to a father he had lost. Juanita supported the baseball experiment completely. She did not question it. She did not push him to go back to basketball. She understood, better than most people, what he was really doing out there on that minor league field. She was a good wife in that season, but something was happening underneath the support. Something quiet and slow that would not show its face for years. Michael was grieving, but he was grieving alone. Or that was the only way he knew how to do it. He turned inward. The man who had always been private became something closer to absent. His body was in the house sometimes, but his mind was somewhere else, somewhere far away, in a place that Juanita could see from a distance but could not enter no matter how many times she tried the door. She tried. She asked questions in the gentle way she had always been good at. She held space for him. She waited. She made sure the house was steady and the children were taken care of, and the life they had built kept running smoothly even when its center had gone quiet. He was not ready to let her in, and then the game called him back. In March of 1995, Michael Jordan returned to the Chicago Bulls. The world went completely crazy. Arenas sold out in hours. Cameras followed his every move. The story of his comeback was on every television in America. Juanita watched from the stands. She cheered. She smiled. She was proud of him, genuinely and completely proud. But she also noticed something that the cameras did not catch. The grief had not gone with him when he left. It had stayed in the house, in the walls, in the space between them at the dinner table, in the way he could be standing right next to her and still feel like he was somewhere she could not reach. The first three-peat had built them up. The grief had quietly started taking it apart. And the second three-peat, 1996, 1997, 1998, brought all the glory back. But glory and closeness are not the same thing. They never were. They never would be. Let us talk about the money, because that is what the whole world wanted to talk about. That is what the headlines scream from every newspaper stand and every television screen and every breakfast table in America the morning the news broke. Jordan's wife wants half. $200 million on the line. The most expensive divorce in sports history. And yes, the numbers were real. By the time Juanita filed for divorce in December of 2006, Michael Jordan was worth more than $400 million. That included everything. His basketball earnings, his enormous deal with Nike and the Air Jordan brand, which had grown into something that generated more than $1 billion in sales every single year. His restaurants, his real estate, his investments, his ownership stakes in various businesses. He was not simply rich. He was the kind of rich that does not go away in one lifetime. The kind that gets passed down. The kind that changes a family's entire future, not just for one generation, but for every generation that comes after. Under Illinois law, Juanita was entitled to half of everything acquired during the marriage. The marriage had lasted 17 years. Those 17 years covered almost all of Michael's peak earning period: the championships, the Nike deal, the restaurants, the brand. $200 million. That was the number that people could not stop saying out loud. They said it the way you say something that does not feel real, even as the words are leaving your mouth. $200 million. Now here is the part of the story where it splits in two directions. There is the direction everyone expected, and there is the direction it actually went. Here, what everyone expected was a war. Famous divorces are almost always wars. It is just the way it goes when enormous amounts of money are sitting in the middle of a broken relationship. Lawyers line up on both sides. Documents get filed that say terrible things about both people. Secrets come out that were never meant to see daylight. Bank accounts get hidden. Assets get moved around like chess pieces. People who once promised to love each other forever spend years saying "you owe me" through men in expensive suits and cold conference rooms. It is ugly. It is long. It costs everyone involved, not just in money but in health and dignity and the ability to sleep at night. And Michael Jordan was the most competitive man alive. Everyone knew that. This was the man who once lost a card game on a team flight and could not let it go for 3 days. This was the man who used an imaginary enemy in his Hall of Fame speech just to have something to compete against. This was the man who ran every practice, every scrimmage, every pregame warm-up like his life depended on winning it. People fully expected him to fight for every single dollar. He was Michael Jordan. He did not lose. And then he didn't fight. Not the way anyone expected. He hired attorneys. Of course he did. There were negotiations. There were conversations. There were documents and meetings, and all of the legal machinery that runs whenever a marriage of this size comes apart. But according to people who were close to the situation during those months, Michael made a decision very early in the process. A quiet decision, one that never made the headlines because quiet decisions rarely do. He decided that his children were not going to watch their parents destroy each other. That was the line. That was the only line that mattered to him. He had watched other famous people go through public divorces. He had watched the ugliness of it, the way it played out in newspapers, the way children got pulled into it, the way two people who had once loved each other became weapons pointed at one another. He had watched money become a substitute for the real conversation. And the real conversation was always the same underneath all the lawyer talk. It was always about hurt, about years that did not go the way anyone planned, about the particular grief of a love that could not survive what life put in front of it. He did not want that for Jeffrey. He did not want it for Marcus. He did not want it for Jasmine. Those 3 kids had grown up with enough complications already. They had watched their parents go through this once before in 2002, when Juanita had filed for divorce the first time, and they had pulled back from the edge and tried again. The children had lived through the uncertainty of that. They had felt the walls of their home shift beneath their feet. Michael was not going to put them through a public war on top of everything else. So he sat down with his lawyers and he said, in the plainest terms he could find, settle this. Fairly, quickly, without a fight in front of cameras. The settlement was finalized in December of 2006. The full terms were sealed behind confidentiality agreements. But what was reported was this: Juanita received approximately $168 million. She kept the house. She kept her share of the assets. She was taken care of completely. It was one of the largest divorce settlements in history at that time. Michael Jordan walked out of that courthouse and said nothing to the press, not one word. He got into a car, the door closed behind him, and he was gone. The reporters stood on the courthouse steps with their cameras and their questions and the cold December air around them. And they had nothing. No war, no drama, no ugly final chapter, just a closed car door and silence. People who had been waiting for the explosion never got it. What they got instead was something much harder to explain. Something that did not fit neatly into a headline or a highlight reel or a story about the world's most competitive man finally meeting something he could not defeat. What they got was a choice, a quiet, private, costly choice. made by a man who had spent his entire life fighting for everything, to not fight, not because he had given up, but because he finally understood what was actually worth protecting. The checks were signed, the papers were filed, the house in Highland Park was hers, and Juanita Vanoy, she kept the Jordan name for a while, but not forever, sat down in that big, beautiful house and listened. She listened to the quiet. It was the loudest quiet she had ever heard in her life. For nearly 17 years, she had lived inside the noise of Michael Jordan's world. The games, the travel, and the entourage that moved through every space like a small army. The security detail, the phone calls at all hours from agents and managers and people who always needed something. The constant motion of being attached to someone the entire world was watching. Her days had been full, packed completely from morning to night. But full of tasks is not the same as full of purpose. Full of responsibility is not the same as full of meaning. And now, sitting in the house she had helped choose and helped decorate and helped fill with the noise of 3 growing children. Now it was just her own breathing. Just the sound of a house settling in the winter cold outside. She was 42 years old. She was wealthy. She was healthy. She had 3 children who loved her and needed her. She was going to be fine by any measure the outside world used to measure these things. But fine and truly okay are 2 very different places to live, and getting from one to the other takes real work. She did not make the recovery a public event. She did not call a magazine. She did not book a television interview to tell her side of the story. She did not write a statement or hire a publicist or do any of the things that famous people often do when their lives fall apart. The things that are really about control, about shaping the story before someone else shapes it for you. She could have done all of that. People would have watched, millions of them. A woman who had spent 17 years beside the most famous athlete on the planet, finally speaking, that would have been must-see television. She didn't take it. Instead, she did something quiet and difficult and deeply brave. She worked on herself. She found a therapist, a woman named Dr. Camille Ashwood, who had spent 20 years helping people navigate the kind of life changes that leave you standing in a room you used to know, wondering how you ended up there. Dr. Ashwood had a small office on the north side of Chicago. There was a plant in the corner that was slightly too large for the space. The chairs were comfortable in a way that made you feel like you were allowed to be honest. Juanita sat in one of those chairs for 2 full years. She talked about Michael. She talked about the marriage and what had been good in it, because there had been a lot that was good, and she was not interested in erasing that just because the ending was hard. She talked about the loneliness that had lived quietly inside all that luxury. She talked about the years of invisible work, the scheduling and the managing, and the decision-making that nobody outside the house ever saw or thanked her for. She talked about the children and the guilt that came with that, because mothers carry guilt the way the sky carries weather, constantly and without being asked. She worried that the divorce had broken something in Jeffrey and Marcus and Jasmine that could not be repaired. She worried that she had failed them by not finding a way to hold the marriage together. Dr. Ashwood listened to all of it without flinching. And then one afternoon, she asked a question that cut straight through everything. "When you were happiest," she said, "what were you doing?" Juanita sat with that for a long time. Long enough that the silence in the room became its own kind of answer, searching around inside her for something true. "I was helping people," she finally said. "Before everything got so big, I used to volunteer. I would go to shelters and sit with women who were going through hard things. And I felt," she paused, looking for the right word, "I felt real. Like I was actually doing something that mattered. Like I was actually me." Dr. Ashwood nodded slowly. "Then do that," she said. "It sounds simple. It was not simple. Nothing that requires real courage ever is." But Juanita started showing up at a women's shelter on the west side of Chicago called New Horizons House. She did not arrive with a camera crew or a press release. She just showed up. She sat with women who were scared and tired and starting over. She listened. She helped where she could. She came back the next week and the week after that. She found in that work something that all the money and the mansion and the famous last name had never once given her. She found a purpose that belonged entirely to herself. Nobody had given it to her. Nobody could take it away. By 2010, she was involved in philanthropy at a serious level, funding scholarships, serving on boards, connecting resources to families who needed them most. She did all of it without fanfare. Jeffrey, Marcus, and Jasmine watched their mother do this, and they learned something from it that no school ever teaches. They learned that losing something enormous does not have to be the end of your story. Sometimes it is just the place where the real story finally begins. Jeffrey Michael Jordan was 18 years old when his parents divorced the second time. He had been through the first attempt already. He was 14 then. He remembered what it felt like. The way the house changed its mood without anyone saying anything out loud. The way dinner conversations became careful. The way his parents moved around each other like two people trying not to bump into something fragile. He had felt it all at 14, and then his parents had pulled back from the edge. They had tried again, and he had let himself breathe. At 18, he understood that breathing too early had been a mistake. Not a bitter mistake, just a grown-up one. The kind of understanding that arrives quietly when you are standing on the edge of adulthood and the world stops pretending to be simpler than it is. He called his father the night the second divorce filing made the news. Michael picked up on the second ring. They talked for almost 2 hours. Jeffrey would not share the details of that conversation for a long time. It was private in the way that the most important conversations always are, but he talked about it in general terms years later. Not in a formal interview, just in the easy way that grown children sometimes talk about their parents when they feel safe enough to be honest. He said his father told him the truth that night, not a cleaned-up version, not a story where Michael was the hero and Juanita was wrong, or Juanita was the hero and Michael was wrong. Just the truth, complicated and uncomfortable and real. Michael talked about what marriage costs, about what he regretted, and about how two people can love each other completely and still be wrong for each other in ways that love alone cannot fix. And then Michael said something about his children, about Jeffrey and Marcus and Jasmine. He said they were the only thing he was completely certain he had done right. He cried, Jeffrey said once, not in public, just to someone close to him, in passing, the way you admit something true when your guard is down. My dad cried that night, and I didn't know what to do with that, because I had never heard it before. That phone call changed something in Jeffrey. It did not make the divorce hurt less. Nothing was going to do that, but it made his father feel human in a new way. And sometimes that is the most important thing a parent can give a child. Not perfection, not an absence of failure, but the honesty to sit inside the failure and tell the truth about it. Marcus Jordan was 16 in 2006. He had his father's fire. Anyone who had watched him play basketball already knew it. He was not Michael Jordan. Nobody was going to be Michael Jordan. But the intensity was there. The refusal to accept losing. The way his jaw tightened when he fell behind. And the way his eyes sharpened right before he did something about it. The divorce hit Marcus differently than it hit Jeffrey. He went quiet. He turned inward. He stopped talking about it almost immediately and started practicing basketball instead. His coaches noticed it right away. He was staying late after every session, running extra drills, pushing himself past the point where his body wanted to stop. One of his coaches, a man named Bernard Tillman, who had spent years watching young athletes use sports to carry things they did not know how to put down, pulled Marcus aside one afternoon after practice. The gym was empty. The lights were buzzing quietly overhead. "What are you working through?" Coach Tillman asked. Marcus looked at him for a long moment. He wiped the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. "Everything," he said. Coach Tillman nodded. He had heard that word used that way before. He knew exactly what it meant. "Use it," he said, "but don't let it use you." Marcus carried those 6 words for years. He went on to play college basketball at the University of Central Florida. He built his own path, separate from his father's name and his father's shadow. And somewhere along the way, the anger and the grief that had driven him into those late-night practice sessions softened into something warmer, into gratitude for what he had been given, for parents who, even when things fell apart, never stopped showing up. Jasmine Jordan was 13 when the divorce was finalized. She was the youngest. She was also, in the way that youngest children sometimes are, the most quietly perceptive person in any room she entered. She watched her mother closely in the years that followed. She watched Juanita rebuild herself from the inside out. The therapy, the volunteering, the philanthropy, the slow and steady work of becoming a full person again after years of being one half of something enormous. She watched her mother come home from that North Side Chicago office with something settled in her eyes. Not happiness exactly, something deeper than happiness. Peace. Jasmine grew up to work in sports business. She became her own person entirely. Sharp, warm, driven, with both her father's competitive edge and her mother's steadiness living comfortably inside her. She said something once, in an interview, that stopped people mid-scroll when it spread across the internet. My parents loved each other. I really believe that. They just couldn't make it work. And watching them end it with some dignity, especially my dad, who everyone expected to go to war, that taught me that how you finish something matters just as much as how you start it. 3 children, 3 different ways of carrying the same weight. All 3 of them solid, all 3 of them kind. That does not happen by accident. That is what it looks like when 2 people, even in the middle of their own pain, choose every single day to put their children first. After the divorce, Michael Jordan did not disappear. Some people expected him to. Some people thought that without the marriage, without the structure of the family he had built with Juanita, he would drift. That he would become one of those famous men who loses himself after a long relationship ends, who fills the empty space with the wrong things and slowly stops being someone worth watching. That is not what happened. What happened was quieter than that, and in some ways more interesting. Michael rebuilt, but he rebuilt differently than he had built the first time. The first time he had built at full speed, basketball, endorsements, championships, everything at a sprint. Everything chased with the hunger of a boy who had been cut from his high school team and never forgot the feeling. This time he built slowly, deliberately, like a man who had learned at great personal cost that speed without direction is just running in circles. He invested his money carefully. He developed his restaurant business. He worked towards something that had been sitting in the back of his mind for years. Owning an NBA franchise. Not playing, not coaching. Owning. Having a seat at the table where the real decisions got made. In 2010, he became the majority owner of the Charlotte Bobcats, which would later be renamed the Charlotte Hornets. It was a historic moment. He was the first former NBA player ever to become a majority owner of a professional basketball team. He was always trying to be first, but something had shifted underneath the ambition. People who worked with Michael in these years described a version of him that was different from the man who had burned through everything around him on his way to 6 championships. The edge was still there. Nobody was going to sand that off. He still expected excellence from every person in every room. He still noticed when someone was giving less than their best and made sure they knew he had noticed. He still walked into spaces like a man who understood exactly how much gravity he carried. But there was something new underneath all of that. Patience. A quiet, the hard-won patience that had not existed in the man who once refused to forgive a teammate for a mistake made in a game that did not count. His longtime business partner, a man named Randall Covington, who had worked alongside Michael on restaurant ventures and business deals for years, described it simply to a colleague one afternoon over coffee. After the divorce, Randall said, Mike finally understood that you cannot outcompete everything. Some things you just have to sit with, and he learned how to sit. That was not a small thing for Michael Jordan. Learning to sit still, with loss, with imperfection, with the parts of life that do not respond to effort or intensity or the sheer force of wanting something badly enough. That was perhaps the hardest game he ever had to learn to play. In 2011, he met a woman named Yvette Prieto. She was a model originally from Cuba. She was warm and grounded and had a way of moving through the world that was entirely her own. She was not intimidated by Michael Jordan's name. She was not trying to become something by being near him. She was already fully herself before he arrived. Sound familiar? Michael had always been drawn to that quality, to the woman who did not need him in order to feel complete. It had drawn him to Juanita in that restaurant all those years ago. The laugh that had no performance in it, the handshake that looked him straight in the eye. He saw something similar in Yvette. He proposed in 2011. They married in April of 2013 in a private ceremony in Palm Beach, Florida. About 300 guests, close friends, family, people who actually mattered. No spectacle. In a no production. In February of 2014, Yvette gave birth to twin daughters. They named them Victoria and Isabel. Michael Jordan became a father again at 50 years old. Those who saw him with the twins in those early years talked about it with a kind of quiet amazement. Not because it was surprising that he loved his daughters. Of course he did, but because of how he loved them. He got down on the floor with them. He made ridiculous voices that made them shriek with laughter. He pushed the strollers through neighborhoods in the early Florida mornings with a baseball cap pulled low, just a father and his two girls, moving slowly through the quiet streets while the rest of the world was still asleep. He was not in a hurry. That was the thing people noticed most. Michael Jordan, the man who had spent his entire life running toward the next thing, the next title, the next challenge, he was not in a hurry anymore. He had learned slowly and painfully, and at enormous cost, that the moments worth having are not the ones you chase. They are the ones you stay for. Jasmine watched her father with his youngest daughters and felt something warm and complicated move through her chest. He was better at this now, and instead of feeling angry that he had not always been this way, instead of holding the younger version of him against the older one, she felt something simpler. She felt grateful that he had gotten there at all. Let us go back to the number one more time. $168 million. That is what the settlement gave Juanita. And whatever remained after that, and what remained was still an extraordinary mountain of wealth, continued growing for Michael every single year. The Jordan brand alone was worth more than $1 billion in annual sales by the time the ink on the divorce papers was dry. Both of them were going to be fine financially. Both of them knew it. So here's the real question. The one that the headlines never thought to ask. The one that got buried under all those numbers that people could not stop saying out loud. What did the money never buy? Because there are things it did not buy. Real things. Important things. Things that turned out to matter more than any settlement agreement or any championship ring or any shoe deal that changed the entire sneaker industry forever. And those things are worth talking about. Money never bought back the sound of James Jordan's laugh. Michael knew this better than anyone alive. When his father was murdered in the summer of 1993, Michael Jordan had more money than almost any athlete in the history of professional sports. He could have bought anything. He could have gone anywhere. He could have surrounded himself with every comfort and every luxury the world had to offer. He could not buy one single hour with his father, not one conversation, not one more game of cards on a team flight, not one more afternoon of James watching his son play and feeling the particular pride that only a father can feel when his child becomes something extraordinary. James Jordan was simply gone. And the hole that left in Michael, the deep, wordless, permanent hole, was something that no amount of winning ever completely filled. People who watched Michael play in the years after his father's death sometimes described a different quality to his game. Still brilliant, still the best in the world, but with an edge to it that felt less like joy and more like grief being converted into something the crowd could witness. He was still playing for James. He just could not look up and find him anymore. Money never bought the feeling of being truly seen by the person beside you. Juanita Vinoy understood this in her bones by the time the marriage ended. She had lived for 17 years inside one of the most watched relationships in the world. Millions of eyes were on Michael Jordan at all times. Cameras followed him. Reporters analyzed him. And fans loved him with a passion that bordered on devotion. The whole world was looking at Michael Jordan. And Juanita, standing right next to him, holding everything together, making the invisible work happen every single day, felt in her quietest and most honest moments like she was standing behind a one-way mirror. She could see everyone looking at him. Nobody was looking at her. This is not a story that belongs only to famous people. It happens in kitchens and living rooms and ordinary houses on ordinary streets all over the world. One person burns bright, the other person holds the candle, and the candle holder, after enough years of standing perfectly still so the flame does not go out, Starts to wonder if anyone would notice if they simply set it down and walked away. Juanita set it down, and the world noticed the flame. Very few people noticed her, but she noticed herself. And in the end, that turned out to be the only thing that mattered. Money never bought back the bedtime stories Michael missed. This is the one he carried the heaviest in the years after the divorce. Not the missed games. He had been at plenty of games. Not the missed vacations. There had been vacations. It was the small, invisible moments. The ordinary Tuesday nights when he was on the road and Juanita was sitting on the edge of a child's bed, reading the same book for the 4th time that week, because that child loved it and wanted to hear every word again. Those moments were gone. You cannot wire transfer a bedtime story. You cannot overnight ship the version of yourself that showed up when nothing important was happening. The everyday presence, the boring, unglamorous, irreplaceable presence of a parent who is simply there, that was the one thing all the wealth and all the fame and all the Nike money could not manufacture. Michael knew it. He did not talk about it in public because Michael Jordan did not talk about regret in public, but people who were close to him heard it sometimes in the spaces between his words, in the way he talked about Jeffrey and Marcus and Jasmine as small children, in the way his voice changed when those years came up. A softness would move across his face, and then it would pass, and he would be Michael Jordan again. But for just a moment, he was something else. He was a father who understood exactly what he had traded for greatness. And who would have traded some of the greatness back, if any of it had been tradable, for one more ordinary Tuesday night at home? There is something this story has not told you yet. It has been held back, not to trick you, not to be unfair, but because a secret is only as powerful as the story that surrounds it. And you needed to know everything first. The boy in the driveway, the woman in the restaurant, the marriage and the grief and the money, and the quiet settlement and the rebuilding and the missed bedtime stories. You needed all of that before this final piece could mean what it is supposed to mean. So here it is, the thing nobody knew about for a long time, the thing that changes the entire story when you finally hear it. In the fall of 2013, 7 years after the divorce was finalized, Juanita Vinoy sat down at the kitchen table in the Highland Park house and wrote a letter. Not to Michael, not to her lawyers, not to a journalist or a publisher or any of the many people who had reached out over the years wanting her version of events. She wrote the letter to Jeffrey. Her oldest son was 25 years old that autumn. He was at a crossroads that a lot of people reach at 25. Old enough to feel the weight of real decisions, young enough to still be afraid of them. He had been seeing a young woman seriously for a while now. He was beginning to think about what a future with her might look like, and the thinking was scaring him in a way he had not expected. He had called his mother a few nights before. They had talked for a long time. He had said, and in the careful way that young men admit fear when they trust someone enough to try, that he did not know how to believe a marriage could work, that he had watched his parents, two people who had clearly loved each other, try twice and fail twice, and that watching it had left something in him that felt like a warning he could not unhear. Juanita listened to all of it without interrupting. When he was done, she told him she understood. She told him to give her a few days, and then she sat down at the kitchen table with the pen her mother had given her years ago. A simple pen, nothing fancy, the kind of object that becomes meaningful only because of who gave it to you. And she wrote. She wrote about the night she met Michael, the restaurant, the table across the room, and the laugh that came from somewhere real and unperformed, the way he had walked over with all that confidence and then stood there being surprisingly easy to talk to, the way she had gone home that night and thought about the conversation for longer than she expected to. She wrote about falling in love with someone whose gifts were so large they sometimes blocked the light. She wrote about what it felt like to stand beside greatness every day. The pride of it, yes, but also the particular loneliness of it, the way a candle feels next to a bonfire, still burning, just harder to see. She wrote about the years that were hard. She did not protect herself in the writing. She did not protect Michael either. She was honest about the distance that had grown between them, about the nights she had felt invisible inside her own life, about the version of herself she had slowly lost and the long, difficult work of finding her way back to it. And then she wrote about what she had learned. She wrote slowly. She crossed out lines and rewrote them. She wanted to get it exactly right because she knew Jeffrey was going to read this more than once. She knew it might matter to him for the rest of his life. This is what she wrote at the end of the letter, in the part that Jeffrey would eventually share. Years later, carefully and with her full permission, because he believed it might help someone else the way it had helped him. Your father and I were both so busy becoming the best version of what the world needed from us that we forgot to protect what we had between each other. He was becoming the greatest basketball player alive. I was becoming the woman who held everything together so he could. And we were both doing it so well and so separately that one day we looked up and there was no us anymore. Just two people, very good at their own things, sleeping in the same house. I do not want that for you. Find someone you can fail in front of. Someone who sees your worst day and does not run from it. Someone you are willing to show your fear to. Because we all carry fear, even your father, even if he never showed it to me the way I needed him to. And be that person for her, not the person the world needs you to be, the person she needs you to be. Your father's a great man. I mean that without any bitterness at all. But greatness by itself is a lonely place to live. Greatness paired with the courage to be fully human, that is something else entirely. And that is the thing worth building toward. Be great and be human at the same time every day. That is the only thing I know for certain after everything. I love you, and that part is never complicated. Jeffrey folded the letter carefully. He read it again the next morning, and the morning after that. He kept it in the drawer of his nightstand for a long time, in the place where people keep the things they need to be able to reach for in the dark. He was not sure for years whether to share it. It felt private. It felt like something that lived between a mother and her oldest son, in the handwriting and the kitchen table, in the pen that had belonged to a grandmother. But eventually he did share it, in pieces carefully, with people he trusted. And it moved the way true things move, quietly without being pushed. One from one person to the next. When Jeffrey finally told Michael the letter existed, not showing it to him, just telling him, explaining what it said, Michael went quiet for a long moment. He looked out the window. He stayed there for a while. Then he said 5 words. She always said it better. He looked out the window a little longer. Then he said 3 more. She was right. He did not say anything after that. He did not need to. Because some truths do not need a press conference. They do not need a camera or a crowd or the roar of an arena. Some truths just need a kitchen table, a simple pen, and a mother who loved her son enough to tell him the whole honest story, even the parts that cost her something to say out loud. Michael Jordan turned 60 years old in February of 2023. Watch the sneaker world stop to mark the moment. Nike released collections. Social media filled up with highlight reels and tribute posts, and the kind of breathless celebration that only happens when someone has become so much larger than their sport that their birthday feels like a public holiday. 60 years of the man who changed basketball. 60 years of the tongue and the number 23, and the fadeaway jumper, and the flu game, and the shot over Russell, and 6 championship rings, and a brand so powerful, it was still generating more than $5 billion in revenue every single year. The world had a lot to say about all of it. Michael sat in his home in Charlotte and let the world say it. He was a grandfather by then. Jeffrey had built a family of his own. Marcus had built a family of his own. Jasmine had built a family of her own. Victoria and Isabel, his twin daughters with Yvette, were 9 years old and moving through the world with the particular confidence of children who have been genuinely loved from the very first day. He was surrounded by people who loved him, not because of the rings, not because of the shoes, not because of any number that had ever been written on a legal document or a Forbes list or a Nike contract, because he was their father, their grandfather, their husband, their person. He sat in that house and looked at all of it, all the faces, all the noise of a family that had grown and spread and taken on shapes he never could have planned for when he was a boy in a driveway in Wilmington, losing to his brother Larry for the 100th time. He had everything the boy from Wilmington had dreamed of, and some things that boy had never thought to dream of at all. Juanita Vinoy was 59 years old in 2023, She was still in Chicago, still doing the work that had found her in the years after the divorce. The philanthropy, the scholarship funding, the quiet and consistent showing up for people who needed someone in their corner. She did not need the spotlight to feel real anymore. She had not needed it for a long time. She had built a life that was entirely and unapologetically her own. Not built on the foundation of someone else's fame, not defined by a marriage or a divorce or a settlement number that the whole world had an opinion about, built from the inside out, from the questioned doctor. Camille Ashwood had asked her in that office with the too large plant, from the answer she had found in a women's shelter on the west side of Chicago, from the slow and honest work of becoming herself again after years of being someone else's everything. She was okay, more than okay. She was whole. This is where the story could end. Two people, different lives, good lives, the kind of ending that is not a fairy tale, but is something better than a fairy tale. Something real, something earned, something that cost them both more than they expected and gave them back more than they could have imagined. But there is one more thing to say. It is not about Michael. It is not about Juanita. It is not even about Jeffrey or Marcus or Jasmine or the letter or the kitchen table or the 8 words Michael said when he finally heard what his former wife had written to their son. It is about you. There is a boy somewhere right now who is watching someone else succeed at something he cares about more than anything in the world. He is standing in a hallway or a driveway or a gymnasium, and he is feeling the particular fire that lives in the space between pain and determination. The fire that says, I am not done. The fire that says, watch me. That fire is real. It is powerful. It is not a bad thing. But it needs a partner. It needs someone standing beside it who is not afraid of the heat, who does not need to be the fire, but who matters just as much as the fire. Who does the invisible work that makes the visible work possible? And the person holding the fire needs to know, needs to understand all the way down to their bones, that the person beside them is not furniture, is not a background character in their own story, is a full human being with their own light, their own purpose, their own reason for being here that has nothing to do with how brightly the fire burns. Because if you forget that, if you let the fire consume everything around it, including the people who love you most, you will win all the games and lose the thing that mattered more than the games. Michael Jordan learned this. He learned it the hard way, the expensive way, the way that costs you years you cannot buy back, and mornings you cannot return to, and bedtime stories you cannot read for the first time twice. But he learned it, and the learning changed him. Slowly, the way rivers change landscapes, without announcing itself, without a ceremony, just steady and patient and permanent. There is also a woman somewhere right now who is standing in someone else's light, who is doing work that nobody sees and carrying weight that nobody thanks her for, and wondering in her quietest moments whether she still knows who she is outside of the role she plays. To that woman, this story says one thing clearly. You are not the candle holder. You are the light. And the moment you remember that, really remember it all the way through, everything changes. The greatest basketball player who ever lived sat in a courthouse in December of 2006 and made a choice that nobody expected. He chose not to fight. He chose to let something end with grace instead of going to war over it. He chose his children's peace over his own pride. It was not the most famous choice he ever made. No camera captured it, no crowd cheered for it, no highlight reel will ever include it, but it was the most important shot he ever took. Because some victories only come when you finally stop playing the game everyone expects you to play. Because the truest strength is not in the fight, it is in knowing what is worth fighting for. And in having the courage, quiet, private, costly courage, to protect it. Even when protecting it means letting everything else go. And that is the real story of Michael Jordan and Juanita Vinoy. Not the one the headlines told, the real one. The one about a boy who turned pain into greatness. And a woman who turned invisibility into purpose. And two people who, even when everything fell apart, chose to protect the ones they loved most. Before you go, drop a comment right now and tell me where you are watching from. It does not matter if you are in New York or Nigeria, London or Los Angeles. I want to know. This community comes from every corner of the world, and every single comment reminds me why these stories are worth telling. If this story moved you, if it made you think about someone in your life, or something you have been holding on to, or the kind of person you want to become, hit that like button right now. It takes 1 second and it helps this story reach someone who needs to hear it today. And if you believe that kindness is worth spreading, if you believe that real human stories matter more than highlight reels, subscribe to this channel. Every single video we make is built on that belief. Hit subscribe and join a community that chooses depth over noise every single time. And finally, there is a video appearing on your screen right now. Click on it. I picked it just for you. I think you are going to love it. Thank you for watching. Thank you for staying all the way to the end. Now go be great and be human at the same time.